Have you ever felt like your life changed the moment you opened the wrong door? Or maybe the right one? Jack Miller thought he was just inheriting an old cabin from his late father, a quiet place buried deep in the Colorado mountains. But when he found a locked cellar beneath the floorboards, and a letter written years before he was even born, he realized his father's death wasn't what it seemed. A loyal German shepherd by his side, a snowstorm raging outside, and a secret that could destroy everything. This story will make you believe that some truths aren't meant to stay buried, and that maybe, just maybe, miracles still happen when we least expect them. So stay with me till the end, my friends, because what Jack finds will touch your heart in ways you won't forget. And if you believe that faith and courage can still change lives, please take a second to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with someone who needs a little hope today. Thank you, and may God bless you for being here. The wind that swept through the Colorado highlands carried the bitter taste of late November. Thin snow covered the two-lane road like a film of glass, and the pines stood still as monuments. Jack Miller kept both hands firm on the steering wheel of his aging black pickup, its engine growling against the cold. He hadn't been back to this part of the Rockies since his father's funeral 2 weeks ago. Denver was 3 hours behind him, and so was everything that felt like routine or certainty. Ahead lay nothing but fog, pine, and the faint outline of an old wooden house, his father's last home. Jack was 38, with the kind of face that seemed carved by wind and worry. His dark blonde hair was cut short, his jawline rough with stubble that hinted at a man who didn't much care for appearances. Years of construction work had given him a sturdy, square build, though his shoulders now carried something heavier than physical fatigue. There was a quiet anger in him, an anger that came from losing a father he never truly understood. His mother had died when he was 10, and his father, Thomas Miller, had raised him with the distance of a soldier and the silence of a mountain. When the gravel finally crunched beneath his tires, Jack saw it, his father's cabin. It stood on a hill veiled in mist, surrounded by bare aspens whose branches clattered like bones. The porch sagged slightly. The window panes were fogged with condensation, and smoke no longer rose from the chimney. Yet the house had an austere dignity, as though its timbers still remembered the hands that built them. Jack parked the truck and stepped out, his boots sinking into the fresh snow. The cold bit through his jacket as he climbed the steps. A stack of old firewood leaned against the wall, half buried in frost. On the door hung a small brass plaque engraved with his father's initials, T.M. The key, given to him by the lawyer, turned stiffly in the lock. As the door creaked open, a gust of musty air escaped, carrying the faint scent of cedar and pipe smoke. Inside, the cabin was a mixture of order and abandonment. Bookshelves lined the far wall, filled with military manuals, old maps, and a few worn novels. The furniture was simple: oak table, 2 chairs, a recliner patched at the elbows. Everything seemed untouched, as if Thomas had simply stepped out for a walk and never returned. Then came a low growl. Jack froze. From the shadow near the fireplace, a figure emerged. A German shepherd, tall, powerful, with a sable coat and amber eyes that caught the dim light. Its ears pricked forward, tail stiff but not aggressive. "Easy there, boy," Jack murmured, raising his hands slightly. The dog sniffed the air, taking cautious steps closer. Around its neck hung a leather collar, cracked with age, bearing a small silver tag. Ranger. Jack's chest tightened. "You're still here?" he whispered. Ranger was about 5 years old, his fur thick and well-kept, despite the isolation. There was a faint scar along his muzzle and another on his front leg, marks of a working dog, not a pet. His gaze was steady, intelligent, as though measuring whether Jack was worthy of trust. After a tense moment, Ranger huffed softly and sat, tail brushing the floor. Jack crouched and extended a hand. "Guess you remember me. I used to throw sticks for you when Dad wasn't looking." The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his head against Jack's palm. That single gesture broke the silence that had settled over the house like dust. Jack moved through the cabin, Ranger following close behind. He noticed framed photographs on the mantel, his father in uniform standing beside men in desert fatigues, his younger self, missing front teeth, clutching a fishing rod beside a lake. Yet there was no photo of his mother. Thomas Miller had rarely spoken of her, and Jack had long stopped asking. On the writing desk lay a stack of unopened mail and a metal box covered in rust. Curiosity stirred. Jack pried the latch open and found inside a neat bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes were yellowed, each one bearing the same elegant handwriting. To Helen. Jack frowned. He didn't know anyone named Helen. He slid one letter out and unfolded it carefully. "My dearest Helen, if this letter reaches you, I'm still here, though the nights grow colder. I often think about that day in Spring Valley, the day everything changed. I wish I'd told the truth sooner. I left the army because of what I saw, because silence was easier than shame, but silence has a way of outliving us." The rest was smudged by age, but one line stood out at the bottom. "If my son ever finds this, tell him to seek the reason I walked away from war." Jack leaned back, staring at the handwriting. His father had never mentioned a woman named Helen, nor had he spoken of leaving the military for any reason other than burnout. Yet here, in this small box, lay the first thread of a story he'd never been told. He set the letter aside, feeling the weight of questions pressing in. The firewood beside the hearth was dry enough to use, so he lit a small fire. The warmth flickered across the walls, casting shadows that made the cabin seem alive again. Ranger lay down near his boots, eyes half closed but alert. Jack poured himself a glass of whiskey from an old bottle he found in the cupboard. He took a slow sip, staring at the flames. "What were you hiding, old man?" he muttered. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Snow drifted against the windows, muffling the world. Hours passed. The fire dimmed, and the cabin sank into silence. Jack sat at the desk, rereading the letter. Something about the phrasing gnawed at him. The tone wasn't romantic. It was confessional. Helen had been someone his father trusted, maybe more than anyone else. He rubbed his eyes and stood. Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears pointing toward the floor. "What is it?" Jack whispered. The dog's body stiffened, hackles rising. From beneath the wooden boards came a faint sound, a scrape, slow and deliberate, like metal brushing stone. Jack's breath caught. The noise came again, louder this time. Ranger growled low, eyes locked on the corner near the old rug. Jack grabbed the flashlight from the table and shone it down. The rug's edge curled upward, revealing a seam in the floorboards. "Jesus," he muttered. Something or someone had been moving beneath the cabin. Ranger barked once, sharp and commanding. The sound echoed through the hollow space below. Jack stepped back, pulse racing, realizing that the truth his father left behind wasn't buried in letters alone. It was buried under this house. and whatever waited below had just stirred. The morning came pale and heavy with fog, the kind that never lifted but seeped into the bones. Jack woke to the crackling of dying embers in the hearth. Ranger was already on his feet, standing by the door, ears high, as if the night's strange noises hadn't faded with daylight. Jack rubbed his face, his mind still tangled with questions from the letter. His father's words had kept him awake for hours. Now, with sunlight struggling through the frosted windows, the house felt less haunted, but more secretive, like it was holding its breath. Jack moved through the cabin, taking in every detail with fresh suspicion. He noticed a faint line of dust leading toward a rug near the corner, the same one that covered the strange seam in the floor. Pulling it aside, he found a trap door, but it was sealed with an iron lock, rusted yet unyielding. "Well, you really didn't want anyone getting in there, did you, Dad?" he muttered. Ranger sniffed the lock, then looked up at Jack expectantly. Jack searched the drawers, cabinets, and toolboxes scattered around. His father had been a meticulous man. Everything had its place, yet there was no key to be found. What he did find, however, was another envelope, wedged between two books on a high shelf. The paper was the same, the handwriting identical. To Helen. This one, though, bore a small note across the top. "If you've come this far, you already know too much." Jack sat down at the desk, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "Helen, I don't write these to confess, but to record, because someday someone might need to understand. The year was 1989, Operation Falcon Ridge. We were told it was a rescue mission in the Middle East. It wasn't. We uncovered a transport convoy carrying civilians, not combatants. Someone ordered silence, and when I refused, they made me the villain. My career ended that day. The others, they're still out there under new names, new uniforms, and I think they're watching." The letter ended abruptly, with no signature, just the mark of a fingerprint at the bottom, as if pressed there in haste. Jack stared at it for a long moment. He had grown up thinking his father's retirement was voluntary, the choice of a man tired of war. Now that lie cracked open something inside him. Ranger barked once, sharp, near the back wall. Jack turned and followed. The dog's nose traced along the baseboard until it stopped at a faint crack in the plaster. Jack knelt and ran his hand across the surface. The wall sounded hollow. He fetched a hammer from his father's toolbox and tapped lightly. A piece of plaster crumbled away, revealing a small cavity hidden within the wall. Inside were remnants of the past. A corroded box of ammunition, a photograph of 5 men in desert fatigues, and a military insignia with its serial number scratched out. One of the men in the photo was unmistakably his father. Young, confident, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. The others were strangers, but something about their expressions, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, unnerved Jack. He flipped the photo over. Written on the back in faded ink were 4 words. Only 2 made it. Jack felt the weight of those words settle in his gut. He placed everything carefully on the desk, staring at the photo until the sun began to dim behind the fog. By evening, the wind had risen again, moaning through the trees. Jack lit the lanterns and fed the fire. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in this house before him, or worse, might return. He poured another glass of whiskey and sat near the window, half watching the snowfall, half lost in thought. Ranger lay near the door, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. Then, out of nowhere, headlights flickered through the trees. Jack stiffened. A vehicle, old, maybe a truck, rolled slowly along the dirt path, its lights cutting through the mist. It stopped halfway up the hill. The engine idled for a moment, then went silent. The lights turned off. Jack stood perfectly still, heart thudding. Ranger rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Minutes passed. Nothing moved outside. No footsteps, no sound. Just the weight of the snow falling. Jack grabbed his flashlight and peered through the window. The truck was gone, vanished into the fog. But tire tracks carved through the snow down the hill proved it had been there. He went to the door and opened it, letting the cold rush in. Ranger followed close, his breath steaming in the air. The forest was silent except for the creak of branches. Jack scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the certainty that someone had been watching. When he returned inside, he checked the lock on the trap door again. Still shut tight. He ran a hand over the cold metal, then over the scarred floorboards. "You left something down there, didn't you, Dad?" he whispered. Ranger nudged his leg softly, as if agreeing. Jack spent the next hour searching the rest of the cabin, behind the kitchen stove, under the bed, inside old coat pockets. But no key. Finally, he climbed to the small attic above. Dust filled the air like smoke. The space was cramped, full of boxes, old uniforms, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. One of the boxes had 1989 scrawled on it in thick marker. Inside, he found more letters, but these were unsent, drafts filled with crossed-out lines, fragments of thoughts. One stood out. It read, "If they come back, they'll go for the house first. The proof is under lock and steel. Only the blood of a miller can open it." Jack blinked. What the hell does that mean? Before he could think further, a noise outside snapped his attention back. Ranger was barking again, this time furiously. Jack rushed down, his flashlight trembling in his hand. Through the window, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Yet in the whiteness, a shape moved, tall, human, just beyond the tree line. Jack stepped onto the porch, gripping a heavy wrench. The cold stung his face. The shape stood still, watching. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the trees. Jack exhaled, his breath shaking. Ranger stood beside him, teeth bared, body tense. They stayed there for a long time, listening to the silence, before Jack finally whispered, "We're not alone here." That night, he locked every door and window, then sat near the fire with Ranger by his side. On the table, the letters, photo, and tarnished badge lay under the lamplight. A constellation of secrets, fragments of a life his father had tried to bury. As the storm thickened outside, Jack realized the truth wasn't buried in the past anymore. It was circling his doorstep. And the lock beneath the floor was no longer just an obstacle. It was a warning. The following morning dawned gray and brittle, the kind of cold that turned breath to mist before it even left your lips. Jack woke early, uneasy after a sleepless night filled with flashes of headlights and the echo of Ranger's growls. The forest outside lay buried in silence, its trees coated in white. He brewed a pot of bitter coffee, staring at the second letter spread open on the table, the ink now faintly smudged from his fingertips. The name that lingered in his mind was Helen. Whoever she was, his father had trusted her enough to leave behind his deepest truths. He rummaged through the attic boxes again, this time looking for any address or clue. In one of the old envelopes, he found a folded newspaper clipping from 1991. Fire at Fort Carson Supply Depot. No casualties reported. Beneath it, scribbled in his father's sharp handwriting, was an address, Mill Creek Road, Pine Ridge. Jack frowned. Pine Ridge was only 20 miles away. He grabbed his coat and Ranger's leash, though the dog seemed to know they weren't just going for a walk. "Come on, buddy," Jack said. "We've got ghosts to chase." The drive down from the cabin wound through narrow roads framed by frost-bitten pines. The fog thinned as they neared town, revealing the sleepy outline of Pine Ridge, a place where time seemed to move slower, its wooden houses sagging under the weight of snow. The town square was nearly empty, save for a few bundled figures and the occasional barking dog. Jack parked outside a small diner, the kind that smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and 1,000 unspoken stories. He entered with Ranger at his heel, drawing a few curious glances. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 40s, heavy-set but kind-eyed, with auburn hair tied in a messy bun. Her name tag read Linda. Linda gave a polite smile. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Not really," Jack said. "I'm looking for someone named Helen Ward. She used to live out on Mill Creek Road. You know her?" The woman paused, her expression softening. "Sure do, sweet old lady. Keeps to herself these days. Lost her son a long time ago, poor thing. You can't miss her place, little white house with a red mailbox. But I'll warn you, she doesn't take kindly to strangers knocking unannounced." "Thanks," Jack said, sliding a few bills onto the counter. Linda leaned closer. "You hear about Thomas Miller by any chance?" Jack's head snapped up. "You knew my father?" "Didn't know him," she replied. "But everyone here remembers the fire. Your dad was a hero that day. Saved Helen and her boy. Never talked about it again, though. Just disappeared back into the mountains." Jack nodded slowly. Pieces of a puzzle were starting to fit, but the picture wasn't clear yet. He thanked Linda and left. Helen's house sat at the edge of Pine Ridge, tucked behind bare elms and a collapsing picket fence. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, reluctant line. Jack parked the truck and approached the porch. Ranger trotted beside him, his paws leaving neat prints in the snow. He knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened a crack, and a voice, dry but firm, said, "If you're selling anything, I'm not buying." "I'm not," Jack replied. "My name's Jack Miller. I think you knew my father, Thomas." The door opened wider. An elderly woman stood framed by the warm glow of a fire behind her. She must have been in her 70s, her hair silver white and tied back neatly. Her face was lined but sharp, her blue eyes still clear, her posture straight despite age. She wore a long gray cardigan and wool slippers. Helen studied him for a long moment before saying softly, "You have his eyes. Come in before you freeze to death." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. The living room walls were filled with framed photographs. A young soldier, a boy on a fishing pier, a husband in uniform. The air carried a gentle sadness. Jack sat as she poured tea. "I found your name in some letters," he said carefully. "He wrote to you. He mentioned something about a fire, and something he discovered afterward." Helen's hand trembled slightly as she set down her cup. "Your father saved me and my son, Daniel. It was supposed to be a simple accident, a heater explosion at the old supply depot. But he knew better. He found crates marked as medical supplies filled with weapons. That place wasn't just storage, it was a front. Your father tried to report it. The men behind it didn't take kindly to whistleblowers." Jack listened in silence, the ticking of a clock filling the gaps between her words. Helen's eyes clouded. "He told me once that some truths are too heavy to carry alone. He came to me after that night, burned on his hands, shaking. I patched him up. He said he'd leave everything behind, but he couldn't stop watching the road. He was afraid someone would come for him. or for you. Jack leaned forward. Did he leave anything with you? Helen rose slowly, her steps deliberate, and disappeared into a back room. When she returned, she held a small brass key on a faded string. He gave me this the last time I saw him, told me to keep it safe until the day his boy came looking. I suppose that day's here. Jack took the key with reverence. It was old, ornate, engraved with his father's initials. His pulse quickened. Thank you, ma'am. Helen smiled faintly. Don't thank me. Just be careful. The people your father angered, they have long memories. He once told me secrets don't die. They just go underground. Jack and Ranger left as the sun began to sink behind the hills, turning the snow pink and gold. The drive back to the cabin felt longer this time. The road was empty except for the hum of the truck and Ranger's steady breathing. When he reached the house, the twilight had deepened into a soft indigo. Jack unlocked the door and stepped inside, the air heavy with stillness. He walked to the trap door and knelt. The key fit perfectly. The lock gave a soft metallic click. Ranger watched, tail low but alert. Jack lifted the hatch and aimed his flashlight into the darkness below. Wooden stairs led down into a narrow space carved from stone. The air smelled of oil and earth. At the bottom sat an iron safe, old but sturdy, its surface scarred with time. On top of it lay a single folded note addressed to Jack. He hesitated, then reached for it. His father's handwriting stared back at him, calm and deliberate. If you're reading this, it means the truth has finally come home. Jack's throat tightened. Whatever waited inside that safe wasn't just history. It was the reason Thomas Miller had lived and died in silence. And now, it was his turn to open it. The light of dawn never came. Outside, the storm had gathered again, thick snow twisting in angry spirals around the cabin. Jack stood in the dim glow of the lantern, the small folded letter trembling in his hands. Ranger sat nearby, his eyes fixed on his master, sensing the tension that hung in the air. The safe stood open behind them, its steel door groaning like an old memory awakened. Inside were files sealed in plastic, photographs, and a small flash drive wrapped in a note. But it was the handwritten letter, bearing his father's name, that held Jack frozen in place. He took a deep breath and began to read aloud, his voice low and steady. Jack, if you're reading this, it means the truth has not been silenced. The men you've seen near the cabin are not lost hikers or hunters. They are the ones who killed my unit. They work under the guise of a veterans' charity called Valor Restored. They clean their image with words like honor and healing. But behind the curtain, they sell weapons and erase those who know too much. I tried to expose them once. I failed. Now it's your turn to finish what I couldn't. But be careful, son. Not everyone who salutes wears honor in their heart. Jack lowered the paper, his pulse drumming in his ears. Valor Restored. The name clicked in his mind. He had heard it before. A man named Ray Dutton, a retired colonel, used to appear on television promoting the organization. Broad-shouldered, gray-haired, his voice booming with patriotism. He was the kind of man people trusted without question. Jack remembered his father once turning off the TV abruptly when Dutton appeared, muttering, "That bastard still walks free." As if on cue, a sound cracked through the blizzard, a muffled crunch of footsteps outside the cabin. Ranger's ears perked instantly. The dog rose to his feet, tail stiff, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Jack killed the lantern, plunging the room into near darkness. The only light came from the faint flicker of the dying fireplace. Through the frosted window, Jack saw them, two silhouettes moving through the white curtain of snow. One tall and lean, the other shorter but broad like a tank. Their flashlights moved in slow, sweeping arcs. Jack whispered, "Ranger, stay." The dog froze, muscles coiled. The taller man stopped near the porch, tapping the snow from his boots. "You sure this is the place?" he said, his voice rough and impatient. "Positive," the other replied. "Our guy said the kid's been digging around. The old man left something he shouldn't have." Jack's jaw tightened. He crouched near the safe, grabbed the flash drive, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he reached for the heavy wrench hanging from the tool rack by the wall. The door rattled once, then again, harder. "Open up, Miller," shouted the shorter man. "We just want to talk." Jack's heart pounded. He knew that voice carried no intention of talking. He backed toward the hallway, Ranger at his heel. The window shattered. Snow and glass exploded inward as the tall man forced his way through. The other kicked the door open, splinters flying. Ranger lunged, his body a streak of motion. The taller intruder barely had time to raise his arm before the dog clamped down, teeth sinking deep into his coat sleeve. "Jesus, get him off!" The second man stepped in, bearded, eyes cold, a gun drawn. His name, Jack realized with a jolt, matched a name from one of the photos in the safe. Mark Halpern, a former sergeant in his father's unit. He was older now, his hair graying, his face lined with bitterness. Years of violence had hardened him into something unrecognizable. Jack swung the wrench with all his strength. The metal cracked against Halpern's wrist, sending the gun skidding across the floor. The man roared and tackled him, slamming him against the table. Papers and photographs scattered into the air. Jack fought back, fueled by adrenaline and rage, but Halpern was built like stone. Ranger tore free from the first man and leapt at Halpern, his jaws locking onto the man's shoulder. The soldier screamed, stumbling backward. Jack seized the moment, rolled free, and sprinted toward the generator room, an old shed connected to the back of the cabin. He could hear their shouts behind him, the storm swallowing every word. The generator, ancient and half-rusted, sat humming weakly. Jack remembered his father teaching him about the circuits, the way to reroute voltage when it froze. "Every current has a breaking point, Jack," his father once said. "Push it too far, and it burns itself out, but it takes everything around it with it." He yanked open the control panel, twisted two wires, and jammed a metal clamp between them. Sparks flared. "Jack, don't make this worse!" Halpern's voice echoed from the doorway. "Your father died because he wouldn't listen. Don't follow him into the ground." Jack turned slowly, snow swirling through the open door behind Halpern. "My father died because he still believed in right and wrong." "You forgot what those words mean." The shorter man, bleeding from Ranger's bite, raised his gun again. "End of the line, kid." Jack flipped the switch. A blinding flash filled the room. The generator erupted with a deafening crack, sending a surge of electricity through the walls. Light exploded through every bulb, shattering glass and filling the air with ozone. The two men screamed as arcs of blue-white energy danced around them. Then came silence. Smoke curled from the panel. The lights went out. When the world stopped spinning, Jack opened his eyes. The air reeked of burnt metal. Both intruders were gone, their truck tracks barely visible in the storm outside, leading back toward the forest road. Ranger stood limping but alive. Fur bristled, eyes glowing amber in the faint firelight. Jack knelt, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "Good boy. You saved my life." Ranger licked his hand, tail thumping weakly. Jack looked toward the safe, the scattered documents, the letter now singed at the edges. His father's words echoed in his head. They still operate, and they will come again. He understood now. Thomas Miller hadn't died out of shame or cowardice. He had chosen silence to protect his son. His honor had cost him everything, but he had left Jack the means to finish what he started. Jack rose, watching as dawn finally began to break through the storm clouds. The wind had quieted, and faint light seeped through the shattered window. Somewhere out there, men like Ray Dutton were still free. But now Jack had proof, and he had purpose. The truth wasn't just his father's burden anymore. It was his. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the world draped in an endless sheet of white. The first rays of sunlight slid through the broken window and spilled across the cabin floor, painting streaks of gold over the ash and debris. Jack sat by the cold hearth, exhaustion lining his face. The events of the night still felt unreal. The intruders, the explosion, the way Ranger had thrown himself into the fight without hesitation. The cabin smelled faintly of ozone and burnt wood. Silence settled in, broken only by the soft crackle of cooling metal. Ranger limped toward him, his front paw bandaged from the previous night's struggle. His sable coat glistened faintly in the morning light, amber eyes steady and alive. Jack rubbed the dog's neck gently. "You're tougher than both of us put together, aren't you?" he murmured. Ranger let out a quiet huff and rested his head on Jack's knee. Jack rose, stretching stiffly, and turned toward the open safe once more. Amid the scattered folders and half-burnt documents lay a small, leather-bound journal, his father's handwriting etched across the cover. The initials TM were faint but recognizable. Inside, pages were filled with fragmented notes, sketches of military convoys, lists of names, and coordinates marked in red ink. Near the back, something thick was taped between the pages. Jack peeled it free, a tiny black USB drive, almost invisible against the aged paper. He stared at it for a long moment, heart thudding. "You really hid it in plain sight, didn't you, Dad?" After cleaning up the worst of the debris, Jack packed the drive, the letters, and what remained of the evidence into his backpack. He loaded Ranger into the truck, checked the old revolver he'd found in the desk, and started down the snow-covered trail. The road into Denver was long and quiet, winding through mountain passes glazed with frost. The morning light made everything seem peaceful again, as if the violence of the night had been a dream. But Jack knew better. He had proof now, proof that could bring down Valor Restored and expose the truth his father had died protecting. By noon, he reached the outskirts of the city. Denver shimmered in the distance, the skyline sharp against the pale winter sky. He parked outside the Federal Building, where the emblem of the FBI stood gleaming above tall glass doors. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and bureaucracy. Jack waited at the reception desk, feeling oddly out of place in his worn jacket and mud-caked boots. Ranger sat obediently by his side, his presence turning curious glances into quiet stares. A man in his mid-40s approached, his gait confident but not arrogant. He wore a navy suit that fit his tall, lean frame perfectly. His hair was dark with streaks of silver, his face marked by faint lines of experience rather than age. His name badge read, Agent Nathan Cole. "Mr. Miller?" he asked, voice calm, professional but not cold. "That's right," Jack replied. "I need to speak with someone about a military-affiliated organization called Valor Restored. I have something you'll want to see." Cole studied him for a moment before nodding. "Follow me." They entered a small conference room with walls of glass and metal. Jack placed the USB drive on the table. Cole plugged it into his laptop, his brow furrowing as folders and encrypted files appeared on the screen. Emails, bank statements, shipment manifests. "Where did you get this?" Cole asked quietly. "My father," Jack said. "Thomas Miller. He served under Colonel Ray Dutton back in the late 80s. He died trying to uncover what these men were doing." Cole's expression shifted, the professional mask thinning to reveal recognition. And something else. Respect. "I remember that name. Miller was in the Falcon Ridge unit. He disappeared after the scandal." "You're telling me he was murdered?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Yes, and they tried to make it look natural." Cole sat back, exhaling slowly. "You did the right thing bringing this here. This could blow the lid off something that's been buried for decades." Jack nodded. "Just make sure it doesn't get buried again." For the first time, Cole smiled faintly. "You have my word. And Mr. Miller, your father would be proud." Jack stood to leave but paused. He wasn't perfect, but he believed in the truth. "I think that's enough." Outside, the sky had cleared completely. The mountains stood like silent witnesses to the past, their peaks shimmering with sunlight. Jack climbed back into his truck. Ranger hopped into the passenger seat, tail thumping once against the worn leather. They drove in silence for miles, back toward the road that led home. When they reached the cabin, dusk had begun to settle again. The snow around the house sparkled under the fading sun. Jack stood on the porch for a long time, reading the final line from his father's last letter one more time. "Don't let war take your heart, son. If you can, rebuild this place, not as a shelter for secrets, but as a home for those still fighting their battles inside." The words hit deeper now. Jack looked at Ranger, who stood beside him, head tilted as if he understood. "What do you think, buddy? You think we could make something good out of this?" Ranger barked once, short and certain. Weeks passed. Snow melted, revealing patches of frozen earth. Jack repaired the roof, replaced the windows, and sanded the warped boards of the porch. The cabin began to look less like a ghost and more like a home again. Word spread quietly among the veterans in nearby towns, a place up in the hills where a man named Miller took in stray animals and helped old soldiers who had nowhere else to go. One by one they came. A grizzled mechanic with trembling hands brought a one-eyed dog. A quiet nurse with a limp adopted a wounded cat. They worked together, repaired fences, built kennels, and shared stories by the fire. Jack found a strange peace in it. The cabin that once carried the weight of guilt now rang with laughter and barking. Ranger became the heart of it all, guardian, friend, and symbol of something unbroken. One evening, as the sun set over the snowy peaks, Jack stood outside, hands in his pockets, watching the golden light bathe the valley. Ranger sat beside him, ears pricked, eyes calm. The past had finally found its rest, and in its place, something new had begun to grow. Quiet, steadfast, alive. Sometimes, life leads us down roads we never planned to travel. Roads of loss, silence, and unanswered questions. But even in the coldest winters, God places a spark of light within us, a reminder that love, truth, and faith never die. Jack didn't just rebuild a cabin. He rebuilt a life, proof that redemption and peace are never too far for those who believe. His father's legacy wasn't about secrets or war. It was about courage, forgiveness, and finding light again after darkness. And maybe that's the miracle we all search for. Not something grand or distant, but the quiet hand of God guiding us through storms we thought we'd never survive. If you've ever lost someone, Or if your own heart carries hidden battles, remember, God still works through broken things, and He can turn ashes into purpose. May the Lord bless every heart that listens to this story, bring healing to every soul who's hurting, and remind you that faith, like dawn over the snowy mountains, always returns, no matter how long the night has been. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below to tell us your thoughts or your own miracle, and subscribe to join our growing community of kindness, courage, and faith. God bless you, and may His light shine upon you and your loved ones today and always.